Good evening, everyone.
Mm.
It is just 7 o'clock, and this is a regular session of the South Kingstown Planning Board. The date is Tuesday, March 22nd, 2022. The first item on our agenda is roll call. Joe Murphy,
Here.
Robin Pothier,
Here.
Paul Jordan,
Here.
Peter DiStefano,
Here.
Susan Axelrod,
Here.
Josh Daly is absent, and Maria Mack is here. We are joined by Jamie Rabbit, Director of Planning, Jay Parker, Brian Wagner from Planning Staff, Amy Goen, Special Legal Counsel, and Rich Bourbonnais, Town Engineer. Our next agenda item is the consent agenda. This consists of approval of minutes from the January 25th, 2022 regular session and the February 8th, 2022 work session. In addition to that, we have the report of the administrative officer, which is essentially non-existent, so it's the minutes. If there are any corrections or additions to the minutes, please raise your hand and state them. Otherwise, if someone would like to make a motion to approve the minutes.
Motion to approve the minutes.
Motion to approve the minutes. Susan, you have your hand raised. Was that for a correction or for a second?
For a second, or for first.
I think Paul beat you to it. So we have a motion from Paul, a second from Susan. Is there further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye and raise your hands.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye, motion carries. Thank you. Our next agenda item is a public hearing. It is a public informational meeting, public hearing for a major multi-household land development conceptual master plan, Magnolia Lane. Is there anyone representing the applicant?
They're coming in one moment.
Thanks.
Where'd he go?
Good evening, Madam Chair. I think everyone can hear me. Madam Chair, Attorney Matthew Landry on behalf of the applicant and the owner, J. Thomas Investments. I'm joined by Dave Russo of Dupree Engineering, who I now see on my screen. I'm going to ask him in a moment to go through some of the changes to the plans and the information before the board that has been updated and revised since the last time we met. But just briefly, I'd like to highlight some items that we've focused on since the last time we've met and attempt to address the comments and concerns of the board and staff since February. The first of those concerns related to density and some capacity. There was some dialogue concerning how many units the property could support based on the density calculations that we prepared and offered on the prior submission. This go around, Mr. Russo has provided some detailed calculations on the plans themselves and has communicated regularly with staff and the planner in regards to those density calculations. So you should see those on the revised set that you see. Those calculations obviously consider the lot size, the wetland areas, and the area delineated for drainage easements to give us the land suitable for development. Those calculations, again, have been discussed with town staff and have been represented on the plan. And I believe the staff report agrees with those calculations that the property can sustain just over 4.5 units. The proposal obviously is for only 4 units. And based on the regulations, the 4 units complies. And I believe the density issue has been addressed. The setback issue, the staff report and the initial submission acknowledges a request for a waiver from section, I think it's H7 of the land development regulations in regards to a 100-foot setback from a public street. We did that out of an abundance of caution. I believe there was a discussion with us and staff during the last hearing and the solicitor that the zoning ordinance actually only requires a 25-foot setback in the R10 zoning district, which this is. And in an instance where the land development regulations haven't been updated to be consistent with the zoning ordinance trumps the land development regulations and supersedes that. So we're of the position that the 25-foot setback of the zoning regulations is applicable here. We're providing a 47-foot setback in the front yard in compliance with the zoning regulations. But for what it's worth, we did originally ask for that waiver again out of an abundance of caution because it is in the land development regulations. And we feel that the development, in best planning practices would allow for that waiver, even if the 100-foot buffer did apply. Because in order to satisfy that 100-foot buffer, we'd have to put this drainage pond along the street in the front of the development and really alter the character and the nature of this this project. So I think even if that 100-foot buffer did apply, we could satisfy the standards for the waiver under best planning practices, and Mr. Russo can certainly address that. And I don't want to speak for Ms. Goins, but I believe there was a discussion about the 25-foot buffer being applicable. Third was the open space issue. The project requires at least 10% of open space, as you know. There was some discussion in regards to where the open space would be allocated and to indicate that or delineate that on the plans. Mr. Russo has done that. It's a little hard to see on the computer screen, but there's a dotted hashed area around all the units that designates exactly where, that dotted area that Mr. Russo is pointing to is the open space, approximately 3,200 square feet. He put that on the plans to better designate where that's going to be. It's just over 10%. I think it's around 11.2. So we satisfy the open space requirement. And for what it's worth, the open space regulations allow open space to be private or public or recreational. It's not rather specific. It can be in backyards, it can be front yards, it can be pretty much where appropriate. So we've done that here. We've delineated open space around all of the units. This is going to be private open space that all the unit owners will have a right to. This is a single lot. So we feel this representation adequately represents the 10% open space requirement. And then finally was the landscaping concern. I believe on the northeasterly corner where Magnolia Lane is, there's been a supplemental landscaping plan submitted that addresses some of the buffering in that area. I know back at the TRC, there was concerns over a hedge, landscaped hedge versus a more natural, softer buffer in that area. And I believe we have addressed that. So I know it's a lot of information just by way of summary, but I think that's a good segue into asking Mr. Russo to go into a bit more detail on the plans, and certainly we're both available to answer any questions that the board may have.
Thank you, Mr. Landry. Mr. Russo, you can proceed unless there are initial questions from board members.
There's no questions, I'll proceed. My name is David Russo. I'm a professional engineer with Dupree Engineering. The layout itself on this plan has not changed since the last time we met on this master plan. The only changes we've made to this was that there was a request for us to add all the data to the plan sets. We've added a text which denotes all the development data. We show the total parcel as 56,151 square feet. We show the land suitable for development as 28,578. That land suitable for development is the total area, excluding the wetland area and excluding the drainage easements Although the drainage easements, I believe it's been discussed, and the regulations don't seem to specify that those need to be removed, we have taken those out of the suitable area. And we do show enough suitable area for the density that is proposed. Then we've clarified some of the additional areas just to break it all down. We've shown the areas of the homes, which is 4,254 square feet. The parking areas, 1,013 square feet. And then the roadway driveway areas, and then the remaining grass area. And we've also highlighted the open space, which is 3,223, which is just over 11% of the suitable area, which is shown in that dotted hatch. There are some areas we could have added to that. We're just showing that, that if you look at the plan and the hatch area we show, there's in excess, there is other areas that a homeowner in here could utilize if they wanted to, but we're showing directly around the units, we're meeting that 10% requirement. Other than that, the plan hasn't changed. The layout hasn't changed. We're still proposing the landscape screening along with the solid fence along the eastern property line, and then wrapping that around the northeast, which was a change that came about from some planning board comments with concerns from the visual from the roadway. So we brought that landscaping up to soften that visual from the roadway. So those are the only changes that we've made since the last meeting, and I'd be happy to answer any questions the board may have.
Thank you, Mr. Russo. Questions, comments from board members? Robin?
Hi, thank you. I have a couple of questions. I'm looking at the map and referring to the open space, it's labeled wooded, and I'm kind of confused as what's to be meant by that.
I'm not sure I see where you're talking about.
Just to the south of the most southern left-hand proposed home. It says wooded.
That's a leftover note from the existing conditions plan.
Because there certainly are no trees left there.
Well, the existing conditions plan, when this was prepared years ago, there was, that's a leftover label.
I see. Okay. And then I guess I have questions for the planning department in general. I'm awfully concerned about the density calculations. So this is an R10 zone. And so that would give you what, 2.86 houses, depending on how many significant figures we can get out of this number. Let's say almost 3 houses, but not really, in an R10, which would seem like plenty of house for that small of an area, and might allow you to give a little space between the houses and the wetlands. I drove through there today, and looking at the lot above, you could hang your head out of the window of the last house and spit into the retention pond there, right up to the foundation of the house. I think that doesn't concern me as much as how close you are to the wetland buffer. You could be generous there. But my question then, what I'm struggling with is how you take houses and push them together so that they share a wall and they become this multi-household idea that further enhances the density up to 4.72 dwelling units, which is a big increase in density. Obviously, I'm not telling anything new there. I'm wondering where is the definition of multi-household? How is that different than pushing 2 houses together? And where is the incentive the town wishes to provide to a developer such that we're going to go from almost 3 houses to almost 5 houses in this tiny little 0.6 acre lot? Can anybody explain to me why this is multi-household and is so much more preferred than having 2 separate houses with 5 feet between them? Why is the density calculation so in favor of this?
So I can, I have too much going on my screen. I apologize. I can expand on that a little bit. So,
Jay, before you get into that, Jamie Rabbit, Planning Director. Robin, to your point, you're really asking a question of preference. Jay's gonna run through the regulatory dimensional requirements. The regulations allow certain types of development to occur on a lot. It's not necessarily a preference choice. It's what's allowed under the zoning code and your planning and subdivision regulations. So again, Jay will attempt to differentiate between single-family development and what a major household development is. But again, it's a choice of the applicant. It's not a preference of the planning board to decide whether it's single-family or multi-family. It's
So true, but until.
you're reacting to an application before you under a specific dimensional code and a set of regulations that we're applying to the application. So Jay will do a rundown on the dimensional requirements associated with this type of development.
And I'll follow up briefly to echo Jamie's comments after Jay's done.
Thank you. So multi-household land development project is broken out into two categories. A multi-household structure, which is a single building on a single lot up to 12 units. So think of a large scale apartment building. The second component is multi-household land development project. And that's where there's two structures or more with multiple units in them. So it differentiates between the structure, which is one, singular, and the land development project, which is two, multiple. Now, when an applicant comes in, let's just run a scenario through an R10 zone. You can do single family. You can do one single family on one lot. You can do a duplex on one lot. When you get above 2 units, or you have multiple structures on a lot for residential use, it will automatically defer to a multi-household land development project. When the multi-household land development project has its own dimensional requirements in the zoning ordinance. So it's really an apple and an orange when you say, when we look at, well, one single family house on 10,000 square feet means you can have 3 on 30. Yes, if you did a subdivision where they separated those units out onto individual parcels, but when you have them grouped onto one parcel, it has a different, it presents differently. So with that said, the multi-household land development density requirements are 15,000 square feet for the first 2 units, and then 5,000 square feet for each additional. So it's a different calculation than it would be for a single family house on a standalone lot.
And I would have assumed that schedule would have been for a single footprint and a tenement style multi-unit versus, a number of large houses smushed together sharing one wall. So 15,000 for the first 2 units. Okay, that's a footprint, and then stack it up. Okay, you need a little parking space and walking space around that building. But so there is no distinction in the zoning ordinance as to whether what the percentage of the lot this is taking up and whether multi-household. I see your difference. You're saying multi-household means more than one house on one lot. It's not that it means buildings that have more than one family living in them, which is what I thought the town was looking for. That would be in compliance with our town's comprehensive plan. We're trying to provide housing. I don't see it in our comp plan that we're looking to put more houses on little lots by just having them share a wall. I'm really surprised that this is an outcome of the verbiage of our ordinance.
Yeah, the multi-household standards and requirements are in the subdivision and land development regulations. They're referenced in part in the zoning ordinance as well. And it is an allowed project type. It is an allowed use. The code does not get into detail as to how exactly those units are to be designed or how they're to be laid out. But these are the regulations that we work with and that the applicant has presented on.
Okay, so thank you for that explanation. I guess, you know, my takeaway there is that we need to work on that. You know, to crowd all those houses on 0.6 acres.
Yeah, and Robin, you individually certainly, and the planning board collectively as a group can certainly take whatever action or initiative you think is appropriate regarding future amendments. But I would suggest that discussion should be separate from this application, right? Because this application is vested under the zoning ordinance as it exists today.
Okay, thank you.
Susan, go ahead. Then Paul.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I definitely hear what you're saying, Amy, but I would like to stand up and cheer for what Robin has just stated. This was in my notes also to make a statement tonight that I'm really troubled by this project, and I feel like my hands are tied by our own regulations. And this is what it is, but I really hope that our staff and our board can get together soon and talk about the inconsistencies in our own regulations, and also develop some landscape standards and some design standards so that we don't end up in another situation like this in the future. I think that unless we want to see half-acre lots all over town with fourplex houses on them, I think we need to act fast before this happens again. So thank you.
Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just echo what's been said. I think, you know, the application has dotted all the i's, crossed the t's, fits the regulations, and yet it still doesn't work. And I don't feel like I do have to approve it. The conditions of approval include this request for 2 variances, or you know, I guess one is a hardship, and I don't feel inclined to support them. You know, this may fit the rules, but we've got 4 houses sandwiched between 2 drainage basins next to a wetland. If that is in full compliance with the town comp plan, agreed, we're going to have to look at this, but I won't be voting in favor of this. I've made my decision based on what I've seen. We've asked repeatedly that the applicant consider shrinking this down to maybe just 2 houses. You know, this is, the term is obliviate, and if you don't know what obliviate is, I'll let you look it up, but I'm not in favor.
Thanks, Paul. Any other comments or questions from board members? Jay, just wondering if you can expand a little bit on your answer to Robin's question with regard to our regulations and how lot coverage might work in this particular instance.
So as I understand that the town has a building, excuse me, a building coverage requirement in the dimensional table of the zoning ordinance. That only applies to the structures themselves, the building footprints, the rooftops, if you will, if you're looking down from above on the project, does not include any pavement or anything like that.
Okay.
Madam
there-
Chair, Jamie Rabbit, Planning Director.
ahead.
To Jay's point, a lot of communities have maximum building coverage. They also have maximum impervious surface coverage. South Kingstown only has one of those 2 things, and that's a building coverage standard. They don't have an impervious surface coverage limitation. So again, it may be a shortfall of the regulations as regulations modernize, but it's the regulations that we're reviewing this application under.
Thanks, Jamie.
There are also other regulatory factors that are outside of the purview of the planning board, and that are in the jurisdiction of the state with regards to wetlands review and impact on those wetlands.
And Jamie, to that point, although the state regulates wetlands and any buffers that may be associated with them, they do not necessarily regulate the stormwater that we review, correct?
Madam Chair, that gets reviewed as part of the process, but I'll defer a more expanded comment on that to Rich Bourbonnais.
The drainage is, Rich Bourbonnais, town engineer, the drainage in this particular project is reviewed at DEM. Normally, and actually we review it as well, but DEM standard is actually a higher standard. Other than the volume that we generally require, but we're in these situations, we're able to sort of follow DEM, but add the volume concern that I have normally. But the way the process works is that if the project either exceeds an acre of disturbed area or is in proximity to a wetland and affects a wetland, and it goes to DEM. Anything less than that will be reviewed at the staff level. And our standard at this point is we require up to a 10-year storm. As far as the coverage requirements, even DEM doesn't necessarily have a requirement for coverage. They don't say you can't exceed a certain amount of coverage. Those types of parameters and requirements are usually addressed at the local level. So DEM doesn't say you can't exceed a certain coverage. You just have to mitigate for whatever you do develop, whatever you're developing.
So Rich, essentially you're saying that although DEM regulates with regard to water quality, it's water quantity that the town looks at in detail.
Well, DEM looks at, DEM's has, in sort of a short sense, it's got these 11 standards that we try to follow: water quality, recharge volume. It also has channel protection, which is really sort of the peak flow control. It deals a lot with land uses of higher pollutant loadings, like fueling stations and things like that. But so a number of the standards deal with that. But it does look at peak flow. What I'm always concerned with is how the volume is treated, because I don't like to see abutting properties, and I've seen it now in a number of places where these abutting properties are getting this continuous flow because a newly developed parcel has metered out, lowering its peak flow, but allowing it to continue to flow for a little extra time, or perhaps even causing more volume than what was used to on the abutting property. So I'm concerned about that. I went back and forth with David, with Dupree, an awful lot on this particular topic. And originally this design called for some other components that I don't think satisfied this requirement. And David was able to come up with the design that we see now. So it addresses some of those volume concerns. And the argument on the engineer's end, and I've made the same argument, is that the DEM doesn't require it, but we still have an opportunity, like in this situation, to be able to address that volume issue. DOT, on the other hand, does not allow added volume to their system. So if you're working on a state road and you're discharging to a state road, they look at volume in the same way I think that we do. So,
Thank you, Rich. Robin?
I did have some questions in general about the wetland. First of all, we refer to this wetland as less than 3 acres, and I was wondering exactly how big is this wetland, or how short of 3 acres does it fall? And through that process, then how would the buffer required change? And I tried to take a look at the permit associated with this lot, but I really couldn't get my way through it. And so I know tonight we were supposed to be updated on this permit being approved and get some more information on that. So I don't know, there's a few questions there.
So the permit it's been renewed. There hasn't been a new permit issued, just to clarify that. So there was an existing permit in place that the applicant renewed. So that is up to date. In terms of the wetland area, I don't have the exact area because most of the wetland is off-site, but it is below the 3 acre threshold. That whole area, it's less than 3 acres. If it was greater than 3 acres, it would end up with under the current DEM regulations, a 50-foot buffer. So you'd have to add the 50 foot off of that.
Okay, and so, how close to 3 acres are we? How does the 10-foot buffer, how appropriate is that really? I mean, in terms of being a generous land developer, you might consider yourself being more in line with limiting your negative impact on the environment by being generous with your buffer, because if you're 2.9 acres, let's call it 3 acres.
I don't have the exact measurement. I'm sure I could get it. We're at master plan. I can, we have preliminary approval still that will be needed. I can get that data. It's less than 3 acres. DM reviewed this application thoroughly. Biologists go out to the site. They review the wetlands. They review our wetland flagging.
I saw that. Yeah.
So they,
I saw that. I just couldn't see how big the regular wetland was. And I couldn't see any constraints DEM put on you in your design. All you could really see was that, 11 days ago, your permit was renewed, right?
They did require us to add buffer plantings along the edge. That was, I believe, one of their comments. I don't know if it's written in the approval, but that was part of the review process. We did have to add buffer plantings along that edge.
Dave, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interject. On the plans, the total wetland area is 21,000 square feet, which is roughly half an acre. I don't know if that's an accurate.
That's only on your lot. I'm talking about the real wetland.
Yeah.
Understood. Okay.
Wow, I just lost my train of thought. Yeah, all you can see on the website is, the original permit letter that was written back in 2019 maybe, and then simply that it's been renewed. So thank you. And so I guess in terms of that planting, do they stipulate what you're allowed to count as your planting there? Is it firebush, or is it someplace that's going to improve the wetland?
It has to be one of their approved plantings. They have a list of approved plantings that you can put in.
Thank you, David.
And Mr. Russo, to follow up on Robin's question, how specific are the requirements from DEM relative to the size and the amount of the plantings so that could be incorporated into any future documentation?
I can look into that and we can add that to the plan. They do have requirements for those type size of plantings. We can look into that and add that to the plan. I don't have the approval directly in front of me. And again, I don't remember if it was a condition of approval or if it was just a comment through the process, but we can add that onto the plan so it runs concurrent with the approved plans.
Yes, I would think you would want to have that in place in the plan, as well as an update relative to the forested wetland or lack thereof that's on your plan. Other comments from board members or questions?
I have a question.
Go ahead, Susan.
Thank you, Maria. So since we're on the topic here of that wetland edge, so I walked on the site today and I see, at least from the retention basin, it's a very steep, abrupt drop off from a grassy space at the top of that retention basin down into the wetland. Where along that slope were you proposing to plant these wetland plants? And if it's at the bottom, which would make the most sense, what is there at the top to limit sheet flow from this property down this, 8-foot high embankment or whatever it is, straight down into the wetland for lawn runoff and driveway and roof runoff? There seems to be nothing there now to stop everything from flowing from your site, sheeting straight down into that wetland.
That's not, yeah, it's not necessarily true. There's, so the units all have roof leaders on them. So any of the roof runoff will be captured by roof leaders. So stormwater will go into the roof leaders, and those roof leaders are directed to the stormwater pond. So in terms of runoff from the roofs, that'll be controlled. We have the proposed driveway area. In the way that we've graded that driveway, we've pitched that driveway towards the south, towards the retention basin. And then we have a grass channel on the south end that'll convey that water down to the pond. So we did attempt to control our stormwater. Our stormwater design is modeled to direct that stormwater to the drainage basin. There will be, in terms of lawn area, there will be some uncontrolled lawn areas that, will naturally, flow down to that retaining wall area, which, ranges in roughly 2 to 4 feet range across that stretch. In the plantings, as you stated, you were correct. We're proposing to plant those on the bottom of the retaining wall. Or I shouldn't even call it a retaining wall. It's more of a rock boulder wall.
Thank you. This is actually the first time I've heard about, unless I wasn't paying attention, to roof leaders that will be capturing rainfall off of the rooftops. I don't remember ever seeing that in any of your plans. But so right now it's just a gravel embankment down to the wetland. How are you planning to, I don't understand from the plans how you're planning to change that?
It'll be a boulder retaining wall. So they'll just use large rock and just build a wall along that area where necessary.
Sorry, so you're gonna have a gravel base and then just lay rocks on the surface? Or is this a structure?
It's a boulder retaining wall. I wouldn't call it a structure per se. It's more of a natural look, I'd call it. It's not a retaining wall in the sense of like a Versalock or a concrete wall. It's more just natural rock or earth to get that slope to work. So you can have a flatter backyard area. So you prevent having a steep slope from the units directly to the wetland, and also getting the backyards a little higher than the wetland elevation.
Well, right now, the backyard, the land that's there now looks like it's 6 or 8 feet higher than the wetland, right?
Yeah, I mean, the land that's there now is not, I wouldn't consider that finished grade or completed.
Will it be higher than this or lower than this?
There's been earthwork out there, so I really don't know, what grades they have out there. These are, again, we're at master plan. We're using existing contours from when it was a wooded site. And we have proposed grading, which they haven't constructed the proposed grading yet.
Right, but right now it's a dangerous steep drop off straight down to the wetland, almost like a sheer wall down to the wetland. And your solution for keeping that from eroding would be essentially a riprap wall? Like a
Yep.
rock? Okay. With some sort of plantings at the bottom, but we don't know what they are yet.
They'll meet the DM requirements. I was trying to pull up if they specified what the plantings had to be. Yeah, it's even the approval doesn't specify it exactly, but their regulations do have specific plantings and sizing, which we can add to our plan. They do have in their conditions of approval, those are required plantings. So the DM condition of approval requires those, but I'll have to add details from their regulations to call out those plantings and the sizing.
Okay, thank you.
Mr.
Susan, can
Russo-
I just add,
Go ahead,
can I just add one thing
Yeah.
to something you had said, Susan? That there's no situation where a roof leader, at least new, in any new construction, is directed to a wetland. It always has to be treated for water quality. All roof leaders should be treated. So that should be, that's on every plan that we look at town, even on our, single family, existing lots. We're always concerned that roof leaders can't be discharged directly to a wetland.
But sorry, so a roof leader is different though than gutters and downspouts.
Well, no, it's the same thing.
So you're no longer permitting regular old-fashioned gutters and downspouts if there's a wetland in the vicinity?
We are gutters and downspouts, but they have to be discharged to a water quality structure. They can't be discharged overland and flowing into, they've got to be treated for water quality.
Okay,
Unless it's a wooded overland. There are subtleties in that, but in this case, you wouldn't be able to just allow those downspouts to fall onto the ground and go into the wetland. It's just not allowed.
so sorry, so I'm glad, I'm learning something every day. Is it underground channeling to these drainage basins, or is it
I believe,
overland, but directed?
David, they're subsurface roof leaders that discharge to the ponds, correct? Yeah,
That's correct.
it's normally the way it's done. So like if we get a single family residential property that's abutting it may be an existing lot, let's say, and maybe it went to DEM or whatever, but we're always looking, and especially during construction, because anything can happen during construction, but those leaders need to lead normally to a dry well or something like that, or a water quality structure like a little rain garden or something like that. It can never be discharged directly to a wetland.
Thank you.
Mr. Russo, could you just give us a little information on the grass channel? What's the depth and width of that? It's a little difficult to determine that from the plans.
One second, please. I think it's detailed on the detail sheet. I don't have that directly on the sheet. I'm gonna assume with that, it's not that much flow. It's probably got a 1 foot bottom, 3-to-1 side slopes. That's a typical type swale we'll do. There's not a lot of flow going to it, it's just that short driveway span, especially because the roofs are directed directly to the pond. So it's probably 1 foot bottom, and then you have a 1 foot depth with 3-to-1 side slope. So it's probably about 7 feet in width, with a 1 foot bottom, just grass.
And can you assure us that in a significant storm, say 100-year storm or greater, that there would not be erosion of that channel?
We can look at that, and it should be sufficient. If we have to add a check dam to slow down the water, we can. Again, it's not a lot of flow. It's just that driveway area really that's going down that area. And plus there's the additional parking that we had with the crushed stone, that's also going to slow down the water too when it goes down to that area.
Thank you. Robin. And then Mr. D'Agostino had his hand up before.
Thank you. And I'll try to be fast. I know I'm saying a lot. I have a question about the retaining wells, David, and are there chemical treatments to be expected? Do those can hold water long enough for mosquito abatement? And are there going to be rules and regulations written into the homeowners association contract?
Chemicals, there's no chemicals needed. It's just a typical infiltration basin that the water will go into. It'll infiltrate over a period of time, and during larger storm events, it'll overflow into the wetland area, but there's no chemical treatments or fertilizers or anything of that sort.
And how are you going to prevent homeowners from spraying fertilizer into them or pesticides into them or whatever they feel is a good thing to do?
This is Amy Goins. I got to interject here. We as a town, cannot regulate spraying of pesticides by individual homeowners. That they're allowed, if they want to spray mosquito spray on their property, they are absolutely allowed to do that. We cannot
Sure, but
impose
that,
any conditions related to spraying mosquito or putting fertilizer down.
but that might be a good reason to not have a lot of retention ponds if we can't control what's going to go into them.
That's up to your judgment and DEM's judgment. I just want to make it clear, we can't put any conditions related to bug spray or fertilizer.
Thank you.
Can you, before we get to Mr. D'Agostino, Mr. Russo, can you give us a general idea of the height of the non-retaining wall boulder wall that you described? Obviously, there would be a considerable amount of fill that would need to be brought in if there is such a difference in grade.
So the wetland area where the flagging is
Mhm.
about elevation 32. And that retaining wall, as you get out of the wetland, it starts to get to about elevation 33, 34. So the bottom of that wall varies depending on where you are. We were trying to get the top of the wall to be about elevation 36. And then as you get down further when you go from the north to the south, it'll get a little higher. So on the southern end, you're probably looking at, 4 feet. And as you get to the northern end, it's probably closer, it's about 2 feet. So that's the range of that wall area.
So that's pretty significant, and it would be pretty significant in terms of the fill that you would need to bring in order to achieve that, correct?
I wouldn't consider that significant. Typically a structural wall, you need a structural engineer when you start and talking like 5-6 foot wall is when you start getting a structural engineer involved. I mean, I wouldn't consider that really a significant size wall.
Thank you. Mr. D'Agostino, thank you for being patient. We can see you now
Madam
as
Chair.
well.
Madam Chair, the rest of the board, good evening. I'm the managing partner for J. Thomas Investments. I'd just like to follow up on this, on the first thing about the boulder wall and the grades. If you go out to the site right now, it's not up to grade. So it's very hard for the untrained eye to kind of see the final project in terms of final elevations and grades. We propose that we're going to do almost like a daylight basement, similar to a walkout, that would almost act, the whole house would act like a retaining wall. So that way there wouldn't be a significant grade change. Along the sides, it would step down gradually, and then the back would be one nice elevation. So we just wanted to follow up on that. Going back into the beginning of this project, when we purchased this project, prior to Mr. Parker and Mr. Rabbit, when this subdivision was brought to me, we had a plan, and this was always shown on the plan. It hadn't been approved yet. I had done my due diligence, at least what I thought, and went down to the town, spoke with the previous planners, and we were told that, I was told in my team, basically what you're looking at there could be built. We made a decision, we purchased a project based on that information that we were given by the previous planner. I spoke to multiple members of the town and listened to any concerns that they had in regards to various aspects of the project. We've brought this to TRC twice to see if there's any concerns, and we feel as if we addressed everyone that has been brought to our attention. We've reduced the size of these units significantly. We dressed up the elevations of the units. We've incorporated landscape designs, a fence, all of the concerns that the board has had. Our team is listening, and we're trying to do the best we can to accommodate everyone's concerns and make this project, very nice once it's complete. I think it's hard to go out there and see right now, given the current status of it. Once we dig the holes, if we dig the holes, it's going to generate more fill. That's the reason that it's not brought up to grade right now. And you see the big kind of hump in the middle and the caps are exposed. So I just want to give a little background as to how I got here along with my team and where we are right now.
Thank you. I think that one of the confusing items that I have brought up in the past was that this is not part of the development to the north, yet it is sort of under the same name and it shares a retention structure, and it's and the previous, the more northerly development is something that was not reviewed by the planning board due to some kind of administrative subdivision that occurred in the 1940s. So it's it's been in a very irregular kind of process, and I think it's made it difficult for the board to see this not connected, but it is, and that this happens to be 4 units that don't count toward the area as a whole, which I'm sure you know that if it was one development, it would have been subject to inclusionary zoning. It's been a little bit confusing for all of us.
Sure. All of that was prior to my arrival, just so the board knows, and any of the public watching. I was unaware of how this went down. You know, this was brought to me and my team, and allegedly it was all ready to go. You know, it was basically, here's the project, this is what it is, and we've made adjustments along the way. There's been things that we've had to do that wasn't what we thought we were going to get in the very beginning. We've made multiple adjustments on our end too. So I just wanted to let you guys know where our team stood.
Thank you. We appreciate it. Robin. You're still muted.
Mr. Aggs, you know, you referred to a walkout space, which makes me think of basement space. And on the map, I understood the slab to make me think that these did not have basements. Am I incorrect in that assumption?
No, they will have a basement. If you look at the slab grade, and then it shows the top of foundation grade that's on that plan there.
Okay, I did not know how to interpret that. I thought you meant you were not disturbing the ground, more just a slab. All right, thank you.
Other questions, comments from board members?
Sorry, can I just clarify that the slab grade is at 35 feet? That will be flush with the ground in the backyard as a walkout, but below grade in the front like a basement? Is that what I understood you said?
The front of the house is higher than the back of the houses in terms of grade. So if you look at the garage is at 39.5. The back of the house is at 35. So there'd be the driveway area is higher in the front.
Right, so the back of the house, if there were a door, is that a bulkhead or is that a walkout?
That's going to be site. That's going to be site determined. A lot of times we make field adjustments on site. So we're going to have to look as we're digging the hole, and we're looking at the grades and see what makes the most sense back there, whether it possibly may be a daylight basement, which is, a 4-foot wall back there to blend in with the boulder retaining wall, or possibly a walkout with a door. Those are the two options.
So
but at the end of the day, it won't be a significant grade change as you would think, as you look at it now. If anything, it's going to improve what you see out there right now.
So there may be a 4-foot cement wall along the back of the house, but I think I've never seen plans that show any sort of foundation plantings or any other plantings around those buildings, correct?
We don't fully have those buildings drawn 100% yet at this time. I think
Okay.
the plantings that you may be referring to are on the plan that you're looking at now.
Those would be
So-
buffer plantings. Susan, is that what
That's
you're
correct.
referring to?
So, but we were at master plan, but not preliminary, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry. May I ask another question?
Yes.
In the landscape regulations with the 100-foot setback, it says there cannot be any parking areas within that 100-foot setback. If we were willing to grant a waiver for the 100-foot setback, but we're still seeing a parking area in that front buffer setback space, which is, I believe, inconsistent with our regulations. And we talked about this at one of our last meetings.
We could take those out. At one point, though, that was a concern, but we could take those out if that's a concern to the board.
The parking areas along the driveway up toward the front.
Jay, can you just show that with your cursor, please? Thank you.
Okay.
Madam Chair, there were 2 proposed overflow parking areas that the developer put on the plans as a result of earlier conversations with the planning board regarding concerns about the amount of parking for the proposed 4 units and the fact that there wasn't any guest or overflow parking.
Thanks, Jamie. If there are no further questions or comments from board members, this is a public hearing, and we did receive, I would like to make mention of a couple of letters that we received this afternoon. The first one is from someone who cannot be here this evening. I will therefore read it. It is from Joanne Riticelli. Her letter states that she cannot attend tonight's meeting, so wanted to submit these comments via email. She urges the planning board to deny the requested waivers for the Magnolia Lane project. The project as proposed is not consistent with the adopted 2014 comprehensive plan in that it proposes a density that is not complementary to the character. Land use -14 of the neighborhood grossly exceeds appropriate density, land use section 7, and is not consistent with the character of the town and development within the existing area, land use section 5. The proposed development would put 4 houses on 28,578 square feet of land suitable for development, where the surrounding existing neighborhood averages 17,650 square feet for 1 house, and on Oak Street, the average is 19,300 square feet per house. The proposed density is over twice what is appropriate for the neighborhood. The planning board should have rules that define what's appropriate density in an infill situation, perhaps 70% minimum of existing abutters acreage. The project encroaches on the existing forested wetland and jeopardizes the health of that ecosystem. Some species, especially amphibians, rely as much on the surrounding upland as on the wetland itself. There is essentially no undisturbed upland left if the proposed project is allowed to be built. This is a significant negative environmental impact. If the land abutting that wetland must be developed, then it should be developed within the rules and regulations set forth by the town as it is. We also have a letter from Barbara Lima. No, sorry, it's from Emily Hanley. She is on vacation, doesn't know if her Wi-Fi will be spotty or not. She's stating that the Magnolia Lane applicant is attempting to increase the land density so that he can build his 2 large buildings, 4 units, by claiming land for the density calculations that was previously designated as drainage structure easements. This is a smoke and mirrors technique because One, this claimed land is not adjacent to the actual building site and does not increase the size of the actual building site. Two, in the past, planning board members have said after viewing the site that the site seems too small and would be congested. This reclaiming of easement footage does not change that. The building site is too small. On March 12th, there was light to moderate rain. The rain wasn't heavy or continuous, yet the two drainage structures on the site were filled with rainwater and runoff. Photos of the drainage sites were sent to planning department members. It is very important to remember the fragile nature of this wetland abutting site. Any building on the site needs to be done with care and moderation and not let's build as much there as possible. A regulation was mentioned at an earlier meeting that would prohibit the parking spaces planned for the northern part of the project near Magnolia Lane. The plans still show these parking spaces. Please confirm whether these spaces are allowed and in conformance with code. The applicant has been asked repeatedly by the board to present options to reduce the footprint of the project. At the last planning board meeting, we were told he was looking at alternative approaches. Instead of addressing the main issue that the proposed project is too large for the site, he's using smoke and mirrors to wrangle the numbers to fit his needs. The board is asked to consider the impact of the proposal. In summary, we have no assurance that this project will not pose a significant negative environmental impact. Also, this plan certainly does not promote the protection of the natural environment, the forested wetlands on the property. The project is too large for the site, and the applicant has not yet offered viable alternatives when asked to do so. Please do not approve this project as it is currently proposed. And interestingly, it's signed Raymond and Barbara Lima, even though the email is from Emily Hanley. So I thought I would read it regardless so that it was clear to everyone. This is a public hearing. I see that Barbara Lima has her hand raised. Jay, can you bring her in?
Thank you. This is Barbara Lima, 70 Oak Street. I'm on a boat in the middle of nowhere, and so my Wi-Fi is extremely spotty. But I really care about this project, and I appreciate that you've all taken the time to listen. I do want to make a comment that that density calculation is arbitrary, and that you don't need to rely on what you're hearing tonight and have to approve based on what you're hearing, because you've seen that number fluctuate greatly. You know, the last time you saw something from Jay, it talked about how the project could only support, the land could only support 3.4. Then they started claiming land that was around the easement that's nowhere near the proposed site. One is on the southern side of one of the basins, and the other, well, I guess they both are, but the southern basin and also the other one. Also, I thank you very much, Maria, for reading that, because I couldn't, I'm sure my Wi-Fi is going to be going out again, but I do care so very deeply about the wetlands and about the density of this project. It's just too large a project. And if I get disconnected again, I've already been disconnected about 5 times tonight and tried to get back on. I'm asking that Jay, please let me know how this goes, because although I'm on vacation, I can't rest until I know what's going to happen with this. This project doesn't work there. And I really appreciate all your time and energy and all the good questions the board members have been asking, going out to see the site. It's all very much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next is Jim Vasquez. Could you bring him in, Jay?
Good evening. Thank you for listening to what I have. And I'm 63 Oak Street, directly across the street from the entrance to what is now called Magnolia. I have just a couple of questions. The first has to do with one I have asked before. Has anybody come up with who owns the road that has been paved? That has been paved that is now called Magnolia Lane?
Can you
That's
just
okay.
ask all of your questions and then we'll address them as appropriate?
Okay, well, it has to do with what you have brought up previously, Ms. Mack, about how this is when Mr. D'Agostino bought the property, he bought 3 separate lots, which is what Ken Bouvier bought for South County Post and Bean. And he sold John those same 3 lots. So that's why I guess it was separated into 2 different phases. You had the north phase and the south phase. And at one meeting, I believe it was the January meeting, Ms. Mackey, you asked Ms. Goins to come up with why the northern part was able to get through without the planning board. And I have yet to hear anything from town council as to how that did get through. So I have that question and how that does tie in with the roads that is now called Magnolia Lane, once called Tarn and Wilson Street. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands up for the moment. Amy, would you like to address the issue of the, I know we've had this conversation before. However, just to be sure that everyone is clear on the ownership of the road, I think that we have discussed in the past how we got to where we are and the fact that the northern parcel was considered subdivided based on some 1940s era subdivision, and therefore the planning board did not have any jurisdiction with regard to that particular subdivision.
Yeah, this is Amy Goins. I want to make it clear to any member of the public that any documents our office provided the planning board, legal memos that are not marked privileged are on file with the planning department and available for review, for your review in person or electronically. The planning staff can provide you with our memos, which include a lot of documentation and records from land evidence. So those are all on file and available for public review.
Thank you, Amy. Mr. Vasquez, are you raising your hand once again? And as long as you ask a question that is not repetitive in nature, please go ahead.
Well, Ms. Mack, they didn't answer the question. You didn't answer who owns the roads. Who owns the land where the roads are on? Nobody has ever answered that question. I've been asking that for over a year.
Thank you. I will see what information that we can get from staff or from legal counsel. Jay?
Madam Chair, as I understand it, it was a paper street. Therefore, it's a public right of way, and the town of South Kingstown, I believe, owns it. The developer is developing it. And at the time that the construction is complete, inspections have been done and the road is ready, it will be requested to be accepted by the town council for formal acceptance of maintenance of the right of way.
Thank you, Jay.
And Rich, correct me if I'm wrong, or Amy, correct me if I'm wrong in stating that.
No corrections, Jay.
I think that was my recollection as well. Are there any other members of the public who have not yet spoken? I would like to kind of move through this and get to any additional questions and concerns from the planning board, so that we don't have a constant kind of back and forth rehashing things that have been discussed without any disrespect to the public. Board members. Thoughts? We are, in terms of timeline, I believe, and Jay, correct me if I'm wrong, we are at the end of our time frame for this particular project for the master plan stage of review. That was a yes nod from Jay.
Madam Chair, before you continue on with the commission members' questions and staff input, Mr. Vasquez still has his hand raised. I don't know if you were moving on from public comment. In essence, closing that portion of the meeting this evening and moving on to commission discussion and possible action.
I will ask Mr. Vasquez if he has something that has not yet been brought up, and then we'll move on to what the board's pleasure is with regard to the public hearing and to discussion. Go ahead, Mr. Vasquez.
Well, I don't know, Ms. Mack, if this is repetitive or not. You're gonna have to make that judgment yourself. Are you aware of the easement on the northern part of the existing Wilson Street? And if you're aware of that easement, I've been told by more than one attorney that that easement would go all the way from School Street down to Old Tarn Street, Magnolia, that comes off of Oak Street. So all the way around the corner now, because that's all one road, that would be an easement, which means that the people on Oak Street have a right to 25 feet of Magnolia Lane to the east. And I'm not sure if that has ever been addressed or talked about. I've read the memos that Ms. Goins had said, and I've seen what was written, and then I've seen the appeals by the previous attorney, by the previous owner, developer. And I've had personal conversations with Mr. D'Agostino in the parking lot of the town hall at the last meeting that was in the town hall. And it's just, you know, it seems like I ask the same questions because I don't get an answer. And this was the first time in over a year that Mr. Parker said that the town owns those roads, owns the lands on the road. And if that's true, then you have to consider the easement all the way from School Street, all the way down through into the new Magnolia Lane, all the way to Oak Street. So I don't know if that's new or not, but if it isn't, you know, at least it's in the record.
Thank you. I will ask for clarification from legal counsel. Amy, can you help us out on this?
Yeah, the planning board doesn't, shouldn't, and can't get into reviewing and making determinations regarding private property rights and private easements. That's something that has to be adjudicated by the Superior Court. So to the extent that anyone claims that a development interferes with a private easement, they have every right to pursue that civil claim by one private property owner or owners against another. But the town can't let that dispute affect its review of the application.
Thank you, Amy. We have another hand raised that is not associated with a name, but Jay, could you bring this person on?
Go ahead. You should have permission to talk, but it looks like you're muted. The phone number 374-2659. Whomever's on the call that has their hand raised, feel free to unmute yourself. I believe your phone number is 401-374-2659.
Jay, what's the shortcut for unmuting on your phone? Star something, 9?
Star 6.
Is it star 6?
Hello? Hello?
There we go.
All right, well done. We can hear you.
Hi. Hi, this is Claudia Majowski, and I'm joining the meeting. I am a current homeowner of one of those lots on Magnolia Lane. And one of my concerns, and I wasn't able to get into the last meeting, but myself and several of the other future neighbors had written letters as well. I'm concerned because I heard, Maria, that you read some of the letters from the public that were sent to you, or emails that were sent to you. And our letters were never recognized as you're receiving them. And I sent them to the board as well as to the town planner.
Yes, I can answer that. If we have something that is sent to us, a hard copy that is sent to us in our packet, we are able to review it well before the meeting. However, if we receive something the day of the meeting, which sometimes happens, and in particular, for those folks who may not be able to attend, I try to read those letters.
Madam
Right,
Chair,
but
again, Jamie. If
Go
I
ahead,
may,
Jamie.
for all of the letters that were sent, either in support, against, or just with general questions, all of those written correspondence or emails are received by the department and forwarded to the planning board members and made part of the official record. The reason Ms. Mack, as the chair, read those two letters this evening is because we received those, I believe, one late yesterday and one late today. So we were not clear whether the planning board members had the ability to receive them and also had the ability to review them prior to tonight's meeting. So again, I can assure you that the letters that were sent in from the Magnolia Lane residents were received by the department, were forwarded to the planning board member, and actually were discussed as being received by planning board members and staff at prior meetings.
Yes, that's correct.
I appreciate that and I understand that. However, I do not recall hearing anything other than the fact that the letters were received, providing any detail of what those letters entailed. And I think it would be only right to note what those letters entailed, at least in summary, so the other side could be heard, if you understand what I'm talking about.
Yes, again, if we
That's
receive them as part of our packet and we have the opportunity to review them and consider them, they are considered part of the information that the board considers as they review all of the details in an application. However, as I stated earlier, if we get something at the 11th hour that is sent via email that is not part of our supporting material, I feel that it's important to ensure that those are read so that if planning board members who all have full-time jobs, I might add, do not have the opportunity to check their email every 15 minutes or until the end of the day, that those are made clear. And we don't like to get things at the 11th hour either, but sometimes it happens.
Great, and I totally get that. My point, I think, and I think the point's being missed a bit, is that are those letters that you receive also something that the rest of the public who's on this call can also see and read? The comments.
I'll interject. Everything that the applicant submits, everything that the members of the public submit is one, they're all considered public documents. Number two, they're all part of the record. Even if the chair one day, or if someone one day forgets to acknowledge something, it's in the record, whether it's read aloud, whether it's acknowledged, summarized. And I think you know that the planning board reads each and every piece of correspondence it gets on every single application. So it is all part of the record. It is all available for public review.
Okay, and how would you, as the public, go about looking at those records? Because I don't think they're attached to the agenda, from what I could tell, to see what those letters entailed.
You can contact the planning department staff at any time and they'll be happy to assist you with in-person or electronic review of correspondence received.
Okay. Okay, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure that it was understood that, we are, I own a lot. In fact, I own a lot that is right next to the retention pond that the house is being built on and we'll be moving into shortly. And my letter in support of the project, I understand the concerns, but believe me, we have done our own due diligence. We're not stupid people. We wouldn't buy a house if we were concerned about living next to a retention pond without having done our due diligence. So I certainly understand the concerns of the neighbors, but, you know, I think that, you know, John has done the work that needs to be done to ensure that we are comfortable moving into that development and into that situation. And I understand the existing neighbors have concerns because they may have had issues with water or things of that nature in the past. But from our understanding and our review of all of the details, we feel that, you know, what's been done in that development, if nothing else, will hopefully help that situation that the neighbors were having. And we are going to, as a neighborhood, be responsible, you know, for providing maintenance fees for that, you know, into perpetuity, which we will be paying for, which in my opinion will benefit the rest of the neighborhood as well. So I just wanted to make sure that that was, you know, known, because this is, you know, my and my husband's take, who will be moving into the home, but as other neighbors, as our future neighbors that have also built homes there, you know, they've expressed the same thing. And I want to make sure that the other side is heard as well, to understand that there is support for this project and it shouldn't be taken as a negative. And, you know, I won't be spitting into the retention pond. I just want people understand that, you know, we've taken this very seriously ourselves, because we're actually going to be living there. So I appreciate your time, and that's all I had to say.
Thank you. And just a quick follow-up question. You referred to maintenance. So are you saying that there is one large homeowners association that encompasses this project and the project to the north?
All I know is there will be a homeowners association associated with the homes that are there. And you know, I don't have all the legal details in front of me, but I believe that the, you know, responsibility for that owners association will be the required maintenance of those retention ponds that was part of the project.
Thank you. We have one more hand raised. This is Barbara Lima. Do you have something that has not yet been asked or stated? If so, you have the floor. And you're muted.
Hi, Barbara, you're muted. If you can unmute, you have the floor. Oh, looks like we lost her.
Did we? She's still on the screen, but not on the attendees list.
It's showing as she dropped off the call on mine.
I see.
She's like in the guest list or the promoted panelist list now.
Right. Now she's disappeared. All right, let's continue on then. For the moment, we'll see if she reappears. Board members, as I have said, we are at the end of our time frame with regard to this major land development project for master plan. There have been several concerns raised. I'm not certain if they have all been addressed, but I think I would like to hear from folks as far as closing the public hearing and then moving on to any consideration for a draft motion.
I would make a motion.
Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, 3 hands up. I'll make a motion to close the public hearing.
We have a motion from Paul to close the public hearing and a quick second from Peter. Is there further discussion? Hearing none, all those in.
Wait, if Barbara
Wait a
Lima
minute.
comes, if Barbara Lima gets another connection to her boat in the ocean, will she be permitted to speak, or we?
No.
done?
No,
Okay.
he will not. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye and raise your hands.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. So we have a draft motion that begins on page 4 of 6. And before we get to that, I certainly understand the predicament, if you will, that the board is in with regard to this particular project. Number one, it is a piecemeal of sorts since we had zero review of the project to the north. We have criteria that we must make positive findings on, not limited to no significant negative environmental impacts from the proposed development, with all required conditions for approval as shown on the final plan, promoting high quality and appropriate design and construction of land developments and subdivisions, promoting design of land developments and subdivisions which are well integrated with the surrounding neighborhoods with regard to natural and built features, and which concentrate development in areas which can best support intensive use by reason of natural characteristics and existing infrastructure, encouraging local design and improvement standards to reflect the intent of the community comprehensive plan with regard to the physical character of the various neighborhoods and districts, and there are several others as well. This board needs to find a balance on a regular basis between the need for housing, the need for infill development, and the balance between environmental impact, all of those other issues that you see on your comments, as well as findings of fact that you see in the proposed motion. So I think that I have a couple of thoughts and certainly would like to hear from board members with regard to this. Jamie, I am wondering if we can add something or at least address something with regard to the preliminary stage of review, because that is where we get more engineering detail, although we've had quite a bit at this particular stage as well. However, a project is vested, meaning that the density, unless there is something significant that comes forward at the preliminary stage of review, the density will remain the same. This does not mean, however, that an applicant cannot change the design at the preliminary stage of review, as long as there are no additional negative impacts associated with doing so.
Maria, this is Amy. I don't know that we need to include that as a finding or a condition, because the same could be said for every project that comes before the board. So if we're going to add a condition for this project, I would say we should include that going forward for all of them. I think that principle is a principle that that goes without saying, whether we say it or not, under state law. So I'm not so sure we need a specific condition for this one.
I wasn't suggesting that it was a condition per se. I was suggesting that it's something that we might discuss, and I was addressing a question of sorts to Jamie. And certainly in the past, when density impact has been a concern at the master plan stage, we have put language into the motion that advises the applicant that if upon the additional scrutiny that comes with the preliminary stage of review, there potentially could be a change in density and there could be a change in layout.
Okay, if we're going to add anything to the motion, as long as it's phrased as kind of as a be advised versus
correct. That's, we
condition.
have done this in the past. Jamie?
Jamie, you're muted.
I said a great 2 minutes of things.
I'm sure you did.
I apologize. what I was, I'll repeat what I stated that when I was muted. Again, Jay Rabbit, Planning Director. Listening to the testimony of the public, listening to the statements from the applicant's representatives, Mr. D'Agostino, Mr. Russo, as well as Mr. Landry, as well as the questions from all of the planning board members, Robin, Susan, Paul, and Maria this evening. I was thinking about some of the language that may kind of articulate some of the issues you may have as it relates to reviewing this under a conceptual master plan where there are regulatory requirements. The applicant submits certain information. They have submitted a significant amount of information beyond the regulatory requirement of information to be submitted at master plan. You know, full drainage design, full topo, landscaping versus just areas. So with that in mind, I potentially have some language, and the language is as follows, and I'll just read it briefly and I can share it on the screen if the members would like after I read it.
Yes.
And again, this could be in either in your findings or potentially in part of your motion. Although the planning board finds that the applicant meets the minimum dimensional requirements contained under the regulations, the planning board strongly encourages the applicant to look into alternative layouts / designs that make every attempt to minimize the bulk and appearance of the buildings to more closely reflect the bulk and scale of the surrounding single-family residential developments. If an alternative design is considered, the applicant is encouraged to return to the planning board to discuss the alternative layout prior to submitting their formal preliminary application. And with regards to bulk and density, some of the neighboring homes that are in the area have a length of 72 feet, 70 feet, 64 feet, 50 feet, 66 feet, and 60 feet. There are some that are certainly in the 30 to 40 foot range, but if you literally drew a 200-foot buffer around this property, there are at least 6 homes that are in the 60 to 70 foot range with regards to bulk and density, and those are single family homes. Within the development, there is already 1 duplex, which becomes part of the neighborhood, and that is just over 70 feet in length with a substantial width, and the single family homes are in the 50 to 60 foot range. So again, this is a comment that if the developer were to entertain a slightly different alternative, that the planning board would encourage that and potentially like them to come back in a more workshop type setting before any formal application on the preliminary side.
Jamie, that language is good, and I would call it a finding versus a condition because it's not really a condition.
Thanks, Jamie and Amy. Paul?
I feel like we have asked for that already and we have not seen it. And I agree. On the neighboring street to the west, there are homes that are large. They're also, I've noticed, extremely close together. They wouldn't meet current zoning and development requirements, I don't think. I don't see how approving this evening and saying, could now come back now that we've given you an approval and do what we asked you to do before, which was to look at alternative designs. We have asked for that and we haven't seen it. That's it.
Madam Chair, if I can, for Mr.
Yes.
Jordan's question is, the applicant has the right to apply under a specific set of standards contained within the regulations. And that's why in my language, I use the term encourage versus the term require. You can suggest and encourage an applicant to look at alternatives. It is difficult to mandate that. So Paul, to your point, the applicant may not have brought things forward to the planning board, but I can assure you that your planning staff has had multiple conversations with Mr. D'Agostino, specifically associated with alternative designs and layouts. there is always concern that an applicant change gears midstream and how that will be viewed as it relates to density, as it relates to layout that they feel they are in a stance that they meet the regulatory requirements. They have their DEM permits. Their engineers designed the stormwater system. Our town engineers reviewed it and has no additional comments, and it's in the opinion that it is acceptable and meets the standards. So again, I strongly have encouraged, as well as a number of planning board members, and will continue to encourage the applicant to keep an open line of channel of communication as it relates to looking at alternative designs that may or may not have any financial ramifications to his development pro forma, but may be viewed more favorably by the planning board or by the neighborhood. Again, it's a strong statement of encouragement. It's something that this planning board hasn't done historically. To Amy's point, I don't think, and I agree with Amy, it's not something you can mandate.
Right.
But again, my conversations with Mr. D'Agostino have been positive with regards to his willingness to potentially look at alternatives. But there's a financial ramification to that, to do 4, 5, 6 different designs and then have the planning board say we don't like any of them. There's risk associated with that. That's why the recommendation is perhaps between conceptual master plan and their submission for formal preliminary plan approval, that there is an intermediate step where they could come back to the planning board and basically have a discussion about alternatives.
Let me ask you this. In the project review memo, it's page 4 of 6. The approving authority must also address each of the following general purposes of zoning: promoting high quality and appropriate design and construction of land developments and subdivisions. This is number 2. Number 4, promoting design of land developments and subdivisions which are well integrated with the surrounding neighborhoods with regard to natural and built features. 5, encourage local design and improvement standards to reflect the intent of the community comprehensive plan with regard to physical character of various neighborhoods, districts. I don't feel like, as the approving authority, I can make a positive finding on those. Now, it may be that this is legal.
Oh, wait,
that I'm
sorry,
not-
yeah.
Thank
Let
you.
me clarify. The positive findings that you're required to make are 1 through 5 on the top of page 4. The process should comport with the general purposes of zoning that are listed right below it, but the findings that you're legally required to make are limited to 1 through 5.
Okay, thank you.
And Paul, that's precisely why I read those, because I felt that those didn't necessarily comport with some of the concerns that we have been discussing. And, you know, the even considering the findings of fact, A through G, there still remains the no significant negative environmental impacts. And of course, we all would like to see good outcomes from the projects that come before us. I think this is why everyone puts so much time and effort and into reviewing these applications, and why we ask so many questions. So I think the board cares very much about what the final result is, and we would always like to do whatever we can to have the best possible project. And I'm sure the applicant feels the same way. That said, I think that.
Wait, sorry, Maria, can I just ask for clarification?
Sure, Susan.
So we need to address items 1 through 5 at the top of page 4. How do items 1 through 8, if we don't necessarily agree with those, play into our decision?
Items 1 through 8 is a general, our general guidelines for what a planning board must do, and the review and the purpose of review and approval of all projects that come before the planning board. So that is background law. That's basically is from the Development Review Act, explains the purpose of the planning board. They're not required findings, which by state law are limited to 1 through 5.
And to Amy Goins' point, Madam Chair, 1 through 8 is kind of those overriding principles that are contained within the zoning code, that development occurs in an orderly manner. There's the regulations are created in a way to protect the environment, that the design is integrated with the development, and all those relate to your actual zoning code and your subdivision regulations. So they're really a reflection of those guiding principles that are contained in the written words of your regulatory documents.
Right,
So
and
if
go ahead.
you're, yeah, and I think Sue and a couple others made the point tonight that we have a set of regulations, and potentially Susan may have came close to using the term that if they're flawed, we need to fix them, but we can't judge a development negatively because our regulations are flawed.
Correct.
Or
And
don't,
just for the
in your mind,
statute,
go far enough as to a standard.
And Susan, the statutory reference for those 1
Sorry, Amy.
through 8 numbers is 45-23-30 from the Development Review Act, which sets forth the general purposes of land development and subdivision regulations. So as you know, the planning board is empowered to adopt its own regulations, and they differ from municipality to municipality. This is the state law that says what regulation should do and what the planning board should do, distinguished from what we're here to do specifically tonight, which is address the required findings for land development project approval, that those 1 through 5 numbers, which come from 45-23-60.
So Amy, to clarify this, these principles, essentially 1 through 8, are something that can and should be addressed or integrated when we have our conversation, hopefully at the next work session, with regard to addressing inconsistencies and regulatory means with regard to multifamily developments and anything else that should come up.
Yep, exactly right.
Paul?
So my last question, it sounds like what I'm hearing, and again, I've only been on the board, a year now, still much to learn, maybe 5, 10 more years, I'll have it. I have no valid reason to vote against this. It sounds like that's what I'm hearing, is that my choice here is to vote yes.
Well, Paul, I'd say this, and for any other member who's thinking about it, you have experts on the applicant's team. You have experts in their various disciplines. You have a few planning experts at your disposal from the town. I think if you're gonna reject any of to the extent that both the applicant's experts and your planning staff agrees on a particular point, if you were to vote against the application, I would suggest you should identify a reason that it would be legally defensible in the event of future judicial review.
It sounds like I don't have a leg to stand on.
That's one way to put it.
Thank you.
It is well put, Paul, and we have been in this situation in the past. Robin?
Thank you.
And then Joe, I think you were trying to raise your hand. Yeah. Go ahead, Robin, and then Joe.
Robin's muted. Robin, you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yeah.
we can.
Well, having had said that, then I feel like items 1 through 5 are things that the planning department can do without us. And that we are really rather useless as a board if that's the way it goes. all you need is the developer's attorneys and the planning department members to look at the rules of the regs and say, yep, it fits, done. So I kind of feel like I've spent a lot of time looking and thinking, and I'm not quite sure why.
The decision rests with the planning board because that's what state law prescribes for major land development projects. So there are some situations, I think you know, where the administrative officer can approve applications, right? Administrative subdivisions. In some cases, the technical review committee can conduct its own review. In this case, the planning board has to make those findings.
And Robin, I completely understand where you are coming from. I hope that this energizes the board to take a very critical look at our regulations and our outcomes, because we certainly don't want to have developments that don't represent good infill or whatever type of development it is. And we are, of course, bound by the regulations. However, I like to think, and I believe that planning staff does as well, that planning shouldn't just be checking off the boxes. It should be more nuanced than that. The board should have flexibility in terms of design. And we've been talking about, but have not yet implemented any type of design guidelines, which I feel is very important. And allowing the board to really look at some of the outcomes and what we would like to repeat versus what we would not like to repeat, I think is something that we should be really focusing on moving forward. Joe?
So I think I'm pretty much in the same place as several other board members. I'm not happy with the history of the project or the history of the road. I'm not necessarily happy that a project this size, the town did not get any affordable housing units. And I have been out to the site and I've walked the site, and I'm not necessarily happy with the final design. But with that said, the regulations are the regulations. And I think we have to draw that balance of being well thought out and doing a good review, as well as promoting good land use practices. But we also have to have a reputation of being fair to the developer. And that means that if they meet the regulations, their project get approved. So I'll be voting in favor of this project with the findings of fact that have been indicated, as well as Jamie's wording, the conditions of approval that's been indicated, as well as I think Mr. Russo was going to do some additional calculations to find out if a check dam was required to slow down the velocities, and any other conditions, reasonable conditions of approval that the board members come up with to further mitigate either environmental safety or impacts to the neighbors.
Thanks, Joe. Anyone else? Peter?
Yeah, I guess my 2 cents are, obviously, the project isn't perfect. The regulations are the regulations. I know the big concern is runoff and water, and I do believe that Rich and his team will do everything they can to make sure that that meets all the requirements.
Thanks, Peter. And I think it would be good exercise for planning board members to think about in our next work session, what would you have changed about this project or any others? And then we can kind of work backwards to see how that might fit in with making modifications to our regulations. Someone just had their hand up, I thought. Who was it? No? Robin? No? Did you change your mind?
I had forgot to lower my hand.
Oh, okay.
Madam Chair, if I can just respond to a couple of comments.
Sure, Jamie.
Just briefly for a moment as your director of planner. And again, I understand and appreciate all the hard work that the planning board members put in on every application. I think it shows very clearly that you are informed, educated, and put the time in reviewing these applications. The level of detail that you go into these, to me, is astonishing. And I've had some good boards over the last 32 years. But again, I understand your frustrations from the regulatory side, but I would say to you that those 5 items are still important. And there will be scenarios where the applicant is potentially telling you that there are no negative environmental impacts. And staff is telling you that in our review and opinion, there are. And you will have scenarios where the applicant and your planning board staff agree to disagree. And that's where 1 through 5 and the other 1 through 8 become extremely important, because when there are two contrary opinions, you get to decide which opinion you feel is the most valid opinion. And 1 through 5 will support that decision you make when the record supports the conclusions that you come to based on the testimony in the record. But Amy Goins' point, when there are two engineers involved in the project and both say there are no downstream impacts, without a contrary opinion, it's difficult to say, I disagree with that, without that contrary opinion, and not just by a layperson, submitted for the record by another equivalent professional entity combating that discussion. Again, I understand your frustration with that with regards to the setback. The applicant has made some improvements to this project, and those improvements were only done because of your diligence as planning board members. The landscape buffer changed, the surfaces for some of the drives and driveway widths and turnarounds changed. The architecture associated with the buildings changed so that they could make a more definitive statement about good planning and design with regards to their waiver request. So your direct discussion and work that you put in did influence some changes with this development. You're still at master conceptual plan. They still have to come through preliminary. You've seen a significant amount of detail that you normally do not see during conceptual master plan. But there is still an opportunity for the applicant to make some revisions and to continue the discussion.
Thank you, Jamie. I just want to add that we have been told in the past that our own opinion, even if we are not engineers, and our evaluation of comments submitted from the public, whether it's local knowledge or observations, is valid, and that when we take those into consideration, we as individual board members, individually or collectively, can choose to differ from something that may have been stated either by an applicant or what have you. So there is some allowance for that.
Madam Chair, I will agree with you. There are some circumstances based on particular knowledge of a site or weather conditions or something where your local knowledge can offer a contrary opinion to the professionals who may not have that local knowledge.
Thank you. Are there any additions to this motion? I think that Joe mentioned an update of the plan. I know that I had asked for a couple of corrections on the plan as well that should be noted. One was the reference to the forested wetlands. There was, Joe, what was your other addition?
Earlier in the evening, there was a question about erosion, and Mr. Russo said they would do some further drainage calculations to determine if a check dam was required to slow down the velocities during large storm events. So I think that if we could add that as a condition of approval for the additional calculations.
Which would be presented at preliminary, is that correct? Is that what you had in mind?
Yes.
Anything else?
We talked about the parking structure up by Magnolia Lane.
Yes, exactly, thank you. So elimination of those parking structures. And additional language that Jamie, which I did not write everything in that. You were talking too fast, Jamie. Your comments early on with regard to possible modifications that could occur prior to preliminary.
Yep, Madam Chair, that was written written language prepared during the process this evening. So again, we do have that. I could reread it again if you would like me to.
Certainly, and that would be something that would be under findings of fact as opposed to conditions, correct?
Yes, based
ahead.
on council's. Although the planning board finds that the applicant meets the minimum dimensional requirements contained under the regulations, the planning board strongly encourages the applicant to look into alternative layouts / designs that make every attempt to minimize the bulk and appearance of the buildings to more closely reflect the bulk and scale of the surrounding single-family residential development. If an alternative design is considered, the applicant is encouraged to return to the planning board to discuss the alternative layout prior to submitting their formal preliminary application. In addition to that, I have modified the note regarding forested areas, look at the need for the check dam and the proposed drainage swale, and eliminate the parking structures in the front yard.
Thank you. That's it. If there are no further additions, would someone like to make a motion?
Nope.
Joe,
Yeah, I'll make that motion. I believe that begins on page 4 or 6, correct? The South Kingston Planning Board hereby grants conceptual master plan approval of the Magnolia Lane multi-household and land development project, a 2-duplex, 4-unit multi-household project located on Magnolia Lane, J. Thomas Investments, applicant owner. This approval is based upon plan entitled Conceptual Master Plan Submission, Magnolia Lane Development, South Kingstown, Rhode Island, Assessors Plat 57-1, Lot 121, sheets 1 through 8, dated April 6, 2021, with revisions through March 15th, 2022, completed by Dupree Engineering, 2 Stafford Court, Cranston, Rhode Island, 02920. The approval is based on the findings of fact and conditions of approval. Findings of fact, A through, looks like A through I, plus the finding of fact, the wording that Jamie had regarding the encouragement for alternate designs. Conditions of approval 1 through 7, as well as the additional conditions of approval. I think there was 3 or 4 of them discussed this evening.
yes, correct. Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Peter. Is there further discussion? And I think since this has been, we've had quite a bit of concern with regard to this application, we should do a roll call vote. Joe Murphy,
Aye.
Paul Jordan,
Aye.
Robin Pothier,
Aye.
Susan Axelrod,
Aye.
Peter DeStefano,
Aye.
and Maria votes aye. Thank you. Generally, we take a break at 9 o'clock. It is just about 9 o'clock. And we'll see everyone in 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. Appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Jay, how about that picture?
Yeah, that came out pretty good, didn't it?
Yeah, really good, really good. So it must have got up for you because it had been laying down.
Yeah,
And it laid down there like a good 45 minutes until 3 more came along, and then they all went off together. She got up and they went off together. Interesting. Anyways, thanks for sharing the picture.
that's not a problem. I'll let everybody see what we were talking about.
Ah,
Beautiful. I figured we were talking about some kind of wildlife.
It was across from Robin's house when I dropped off a packet last month.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right out my window.
Was he eating your shrubs, Robin?
Only the ones it likes. We do grow some deer lettuce. Some people call it hostas.
hostas, yeah.
That's
Hey,
fine with me.
Hey,
We
Jamie,
are,
before we
ahead.
get started again, can you send us the text of the addition to that last motion so that we can just have it in our records?
I think that was a yes from Jamie, and it would also be reflected in future minutes. The contents of the motion should be. Yes, that's a good
Thanks.
idea.
I'll answer for Jamie. That will be a yes. Yes, we can do that.
Thank you.
All right, let's continue on to our next agenda item, which is a public hearing, major multi-household land development project preliminary plan. The residence is on Holly. This has been continued from January 25th, 2022 and February 22nd, 2022. Is there anyone representing the applicant?
Madam Chair,
Yes.
just for clarification, that was a typo on the agenda. The public hearing was closed last month. And it did carry over by mistake. But that action was taken last month to close the public hearing.
Is there anyone representing the applicant?
Yes, good evening. I'm John Kenyon. I'm attorney for the applicant, Scott Hallberg. My understanding was I was out of state last month, but my understanding was the public meeting was closed. So we're here tonight along with the applicant's engineer if the board has any questions.
Thank you. Are there questions, comments from board members? I know that I have a couple of, oh, go ahead, Robin, why don't you go?
So I'm not sure that we were showed proof that the water from that retention pond in the back was not indeed going to run off into the neighbor's yard. I think we were looking for some verification that that was not going to increase the flow onto that property.
If I may, my understanding was that the engineer last month did provide testimony that there wouldn't be an increase, a runoff onto the neighbor's property. I don't know if Josh, are you on here tonight?
He is, he's just muted.
I am, John. Good evening, Ms. Mack and members of the board, Josh Rosen from Principe Engineering. I believe I did offer the extra testimony and the confirmation to the point that the runoff would not impact the neighboring properties. We did a supplemental analysis that was requested of us at the time. I don't believe there were any other outstanding concerns from our discussion last month.
I thought that the bottom of your pond was like, I'm gonna pull out a number 35 of an elevation. And so was the abutters back property. And so what was gonna prevent that from flowing onto their property? I thought that was kind of still open-ended.
Yeah, I don't remember it that way at all, but I don't know if any of the other board members were looking for any further information. I mean, the design was not updated or revised elevation wise. It's the same way that it was presented originally at preliminary, the same way the DEM reviewed it and approved it as well. I'm not sure that the elevations really showed what you're summarizing, but that retention area is 1.5 feet deep. I think the top's elevation 35, the bottom's 33. I think the grade around it's 34. And we provided the hydraulic calculations and, you know, the associated stormwater data that's been required, you know, and the system works. And we've achieved the goals of the regulations that we're charged with meeting. And we went above and beyond with the extra calculations that we provided to demonstrate that.
And you're,
Robin and Josh, I think if I remember correctly, the question or the discussion had to do with the base elevation of the drainage feature and the elevation of the outflow weir. I believe that was what was mentioned last month. Maybe that's what Robin's picking up on.
correct. Yep.
Didn't Rich comment on that and say there'd be no additional runoff? I thought Rich talked about that for quite a bit.
That is my recollection as well.
What I discussed was that as the data is provided, there's no proposed increase in peak flow leaving this site, and no increase in volume up to a 100%. That's the way the data's been provided and approved at TDM. And I was able to confirm a lot of those things.
So I had a couple of thoughts with regard to that. Overall, this project has steadily moved along. I think that we are pleased that the applicant has offered an additional affordable unit. That is definitely a plus. To me, the biggest concern is one of runoff, particularly with regard to that northwestern corner. And I have a couple of suggestions relative to that, because we are seeing more and more projects that post-development, post-construction are having issues with stormwater, and the future owners are coming back to the town and rightfully so expressing their concerns. I think we need to do everything that we can to try to mitigate that situation. Granted, a greater use would be for DEM to revise their stormwater regulations that reflect what the 100-year storm actually is in this day and age of our climate crisis. However, with regard to this particular project, I have a couple of suggestions that I hope the board would consider adding to the conditions of approval. The first one is to monitor or reevaluate the effectiveness of the weir for at least a 2-year time frame, and report to the planning staff if there are any issues found with that. The second one sort of relates to, again, the stormwater. I feel that there should be language, required language in the homeowners association that states that there is potentially this overflow weir that is their responsibility, that they have to manage the drainage infrastructure and keep it in working order. I think that would be just another additional kind of check and balance that could help us in our quest to have the best possible outcomes. And then the third thing is I would like to see some kind of prior to the actual installation of the solar fence, the stockade fence, can't read my own writing, that there should be a site visit that would include planning staff, DPS, the applicant, and an arborist as well, because my concern is that the arborvitae hedge, which has a dual purpose, it allows for better infiltration of stormwater, it represents a screening. I am concerned with the installation of the stockade fence, that it could negatively impact not only the functionality of the hedge, but the lifespan of the hedge. And I think it would be wise to have that evaluated prior to installation of that fence. So those are my thoughts. Joe.
To go along with what Maria just brought up, is it possible that we require the applicant to retain the engineer for post-construction services to do a verification that the drainage system was built as designed and give that certificate to the town at the end of the project, so it doesn't become if there was a problem, it wouldn't be a finger pointing between the potential contractor and the engineer, but require the engineer to do those post-construction services.
Can I add one thing to that though? Is that's you can include that. That normally happens, such as this, anyways. We ask that the engineer at the end of the project sign off that everything's been constructed per plan. What you may want to add though is that the engineer is required to show that they've been inspecting through the process of construction, so that we confirm that it's at least been, they've actually been on site as it's being constructed. I think that would make it a little better, and actually make better the process we sort of already have.
So I would recommend that as a condition of approval, Maria.
Thank you. Good idea, Joe. Susan.
Maria, I really like your idea about a 2-year monitoring program to see how the weir is working and how that's affecting the neighbors. But if we do a 2-year monitoring program, I think that needs to be attached to and what we'll do if it's not working as expected. Monitoring is great, but who's responsible and how does it get corrected if it doesn't work as intended? So I don't know what rights we have to demand that someone take responsibility, but I think there needs to be a determination as to what to do if it's not working.
Good point, Susan. Jamie, do you have any thoughts on that?
Jamie's muted.
Bear with me, I was trying to type up something in response to Mr. Murphy's comments. I think the difficulty, and again, council can add to this, is I think you can hold the developer to a standard associated with the design. So to Mr. Bourbonnet's point, that adding a condition that requires the design engineer to be present during construction and then ultimately verify that the infrastructure associated with stormwater retention and detention and infiltration was designed according to the plan. Mr. Bourbonnais has explained to the planning board members last month that in essence, this is at the bottom of a very large drainage area, and to have an engineer quantify that in a storm event, his detention system was overtopped would be difficult because there's this extremely large upstream watershed influencing that, and the development may not have caused that overtopping. It's everything that occurred upstream of the development that potentially occurred. But I think you're within your rights as a planning board to require that the design engineer is on site during construction, is involved in the inspections and construction oversight, and then verifies in a written form that it was installed, inspected, and designed per the plans, and then monitor the workings of that for a minimum of 2 years as it relates to, is it functioning according to design, and in the particular events that occurred, did it function appropriately? But if we have something that exceeds the design standards in a storm event, that is not the applicant's responsibility. If there's something upstream of the development that impacts the drainage to this site, that is not the developer's responsibility. They can only control their design and the storm event it was designed for. I think, Susan, you made that point, and it reinforces Mr. Murphy as well as Ms. Mack's point regarding inspection and follow-up.
So the question that Susan asked was, what would happen if it was not working? How would the reporting occur? Do we specify a department or?
No, I would, you bear with me, I was writing as everybody was talking. And again, I had two aspects as Ms. Mack was speaking and Mr. Murphy was also following up on that. In essence, what I had is that the developer shall create a document that clearly details the maintenance and financial responsibilities associated with the site's stormwater structures/systems. The document may take the form of an HOA and shall incorporate language that includes the maintenance and inspection schedule to be recorded on the land records of the town of South Kingstown. The maintenance and inspection schedule shall be prepared by a Rhode Island registered engineer and shall be signed and sealed. The document shall also include a detailed monitoring and reporting program. Monitoring and reporting program shall occur for a minimum of 2 years post-construction. Prior to the recording of the document, it shall be reviewed and approved by the planning board's administrative officer in consultation with the town's legal counsel and town engineer. In addition to that, the applicant shall be required to have the design engineer present during construction of the proposed stormwater structures and verify that they were designed, inspected, and constructed to that standard.
Jamie, thank you for that language. I just want to be sure that that language finds itself in the homeowners association documents.
That would, Maria, that would be my job in reviewing that.
That would be important so that future owners are well aware.
So can I ask a question about that? It's been implied at an earlier meeting that these would all be rental units. So there wouldn't be a homeowners association, correct? How does that work with the rental units?
I think council can solidify this, but the homeowners association could have a membership of one if it was a rental, be the owner. And if it was ever subsequently condoed, the homeowner membership would expand.
Correct.
So if there's a homeowner membership of one, how do they make any changes to their rules and regulations? I mean, how does that work?
The single member can rewrite
Has
it.
complete authority.
well, not complete in
Yeah.
that it couldn't eliminate something that this board required to be
Okay.
included as a condition of approval.
Good. Thank you. That was my concern. Thanks. Robin?
So with this type of idea, do we have some assurance that there's an alternative thing that could be done to alter the situation that isn't working? Or, once the development is done, are there any viable choices left?
Good question. Josh, do you have an answer for that?
You're muted, Josh.
I'm sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I just didn't quite get the entire question, if you don't mind repeating it.
Not a problem. So my concern would be that once we've developed, let's say that the drainage is not working properly within, this 2-year survey. What kind of promise do we have that there's some way of rectifying this, or have you run out of things you could do with the water and you've developed the land and there's really no way of fixing it?
Well, that's a good question. It is part of the process at the design phase and the permitting phase that we take the site as a whole. We analyze the pre and post watersheds. We utilize best management practice that fits that site based on any constraints, based on that analysis we perform. And then we run the calculations to show that it's going to meet or exceed the regulations. And DEM will review that as they have and basically concur. So we've put the best design effort forth on the site, and we wouldn't expect that if it was maintained properly, that there would be any issues with the function of it. That's how it's been designed, including the weir at its elevation where it is and how that was designed. So, I mean, it's not different from any of these other projects that you see that have selected a stormwater practice. It's been designed and vetted in a certain way, and it has to be inspected when it's installed. It has to have confirmation that
Well, Josh,
whatever
there's no point in monitoring it for 2 years if we don't have a backup plan.
Yeah, I mean, it's not part of what the design is intended to meet or exceed the regulations and function if installed properly. So I'm not saying that the 2-year plan makes sense. I'm I mean, there's certainly things that can be done in situations where stormwater doesn't function, but in all those scenarios, you have to find like the root source of the problem. Is it a watershed issue? Is it an installation issue? You guys are focused on eliminating a possible installation issue by having the oversight, which is fine. We have to do a certain amount of oversight anyway for the DEM permitting that we received. So we're good with that part. But so in other words, there'd be no reason why there'd be a direct correlation between this development and what's going on within its property limits and the potential lack of functioning of the system if the installation's proper and the maintenance is being performed. That's how it was designed. I don't know what else to say. I mean, we wouldn't know what alternatives to look into unless we found a source of a problem down the road. I don't know what else to say. That we're not obligated to come up with 4 different scenarios or options for a stormwater system. We select the one that fits the site best. We design it accordingly. We present the information. We meet the regulations, and somebody reviews the design and concurs or offers suggestions along the way, and we make those revisions accordingly.
Josh, I don't think you really answered her question. I think the short version of her question is, what's plan B? It's kind of like we have in the past seen community septic systems when there was no space to do OWTS and with very little extra space. And the question was asked, what if this community system is inundated and it doesn't appear that you have any space? So it's kind of like, what is the plan B?
Can I rephrase the question?
Certainly.
What water goes to this detention basin behind these buildings? And if for whatever reason, at the end of 2 years or during this 2-year period, we find out that it doesn't work, could that water be rerouted? I think we've already heard that some of the water that currently flows to the back of the property with this development is being rerouted to the street out in front. And so the question is there other water, that could potentially be diverted away from the detention basin if it turns out that it's not functioning?
There's honestly not a lot of water that goes to the detention basin, infiltration area. It's not capturing, it's not designed to capture, and its location is not positioned where it's going to capture some of the upgrading watershed that gets to the neighboring properties. We have Holly Street itself, where actually the fronts of these units drain to Holly Street and will drain to Holly Street. The watershed that goes through this property and it is effectively consumed within this infiltration area is literally the land area within the property limits. So we're talking about the rooftops and the grassed or graded areas between the buildings. That's what's going there. It's not a substantial amount of water. It's not, because of the way this site is positioned. We're not intercepting a large sub area. We're not intercepting or Holly Street's not going to be draining off of the roadway right of way and into the property. None of that. It's just within the property limits is what we're taking. That's why we're able to basically hold and infiltrate the entire 100-year storm within that area, because it's truly not a substantial amount of water in the grand scheme of things.
So just to follow up on that, it sounds like the best that we can do here is to ensure that it's installed correctly by having you or some engineer on site to make sure that this is done properly. And I don't know if the 2-year monitoring plan gets us anywhere other than some information.
Yeah, I didn't mean to like not answer the original question. And to Maria's point, I understand the plan B, but again, the system is designed to handle what it's going to see from a runoff standpoint. So from the design perspective, there is no need for a plan B. That's it. I don't know how else to answer that part of it, but
I think I said this about the Titanic, but
Well, and it also, and this is, I know, a conversation for another day, but there are communities that do watershed-based planning, and sometimes we operate in a silo, so to speak, if we're ignoring what is happening in the watershed and we're looking at this tiny little portion of it and kind of using it as an aside. Oh, well, there's a watershed and this is down gradient and this could cause a problem. And I think it's a conversation in the future worth having. Jamie?
Fair enough. Yep. Madam Chair, with regards to the monitoring, I think it does play a role. I've been on too many sites post-construction where, they've been well designed, they've been vegetated. Remember, it's construction and it's immediately post-construction. So, typical grass growing for sign off is within a square foot. There needs to be 100 blades of grass, and that is acceptable turf coverage. Even with 100 blades of grass doesn't mean that grass has a substantial root system. These are grass-lined slopes. These are grass bottom. So there is always the potential that one small area has a small slump. It affects the capacity of the basin. And that could occur, a month after these are built. It could happen 6 months after that because of back-to-back storm events. You could have a landscaping company who decides to use the northwest corner as a place to put all their grass clippings. They could fail to maintain and remove leaves from the system. These systems are not devoid of maintenance and requirements. So monitoring it for 2 years, I think, is very reasonable to assure that there's proper vegetative growth and the procedures associated with maintaining the property and maintaining the basins in a working manner are followed through on. So to Robin's point, I think there is a role for that monitoring. And again, it gives some credence to what is happening in a storm event and what are the results of the design versus just walking away from it.
Thanks, Jamie. Anyone else? Nothing? Susan, nothing? Go ahead.
Sorry, I'd like to move on because I'm fixated on the trees on the north part of the property.
Okay.
So do we have some sort of agreement that we are working our hardest to save some oak trees?
Jamie, is that something you can answer? And do we still have a tree warden?
We, Madam Chair, we do have a tree warden. Given the nature and proximity of some of the buildings and structures and the stormwater infrastructure associated with those buildings, that there are a couple of oaks that, again, we're reviewing this in a winter condition, have not leafed out yet. And in the draft motion that we prepared for your consideration, we, in discussions with the applicant, have suggested that an effort to maintain any existing deciduous tree cover is done during construction, but also if there are identified specimen trees, which I'm aware of maybe 3 or 4, and those 3 or 4 are in the way or jeopardize the structure of the units, that the applicant replace those 2 for 1 on the site. And those would be in addition to the already representative trees on the site in their landscaping plan. There is always an issue is if there are 4 trees and someone evaluates the need to plant 8 more, and where those 8 go would be scattered or placed throughout the site, or the language is that the applicant would prepare an alternative landscape plan to substitute that 2 to 1, but he wouldn't just be able to walk away from that replacement. I think we used 12-inch diameter DBH.
And Jamie, was that based on the average diameter of the existing trees that Susan was referring to?
Those larger trees would fall within that scope.
Do I think that and I like that text, do I think that those replacement trees would be determined both by their species and by their placement by the administrative officer, or will we see this again?
I'd have to defer to I haven't memorized that language that we wrote a week ago, but if you bear with me a moment, I can pull that up.
The language in the motion has the administrative officer in consultation with the Director of Public Services.
Thank you, Maria.
But I'd also like to restate that we're going to do everything in our power to save some of those oak trees. Those trees are old and fabulous, and if they are healthy, like when they leaf out in the spring, it would be great to save as many as possible.
And key to that is something that we have required in the past. I believe we have specific measures that we have used during clearing and construction, in particular to avoid compaction of the soil. often leads to a slow and lingering death of existing trees. Other than that, as Jamie stated, if they're not in the way of a building. But certainly following those measures would be an important avenue toward ensuring the survival of any trees that can be saved.
I have another question if we're completely changing topics again. I'd like to confirm the price of these apartment units, and there'll be 3 that will be affordable. But I believe in the original agreement, we had 80% of AMI for 99 years. But I don't see it in the motion. Can I confirm that that's where we're at with these units?
I can address that. The original at master plan, when we agreed to the 3rd unit, we had agreed to the first 2 being 80% and the 3rd one either being 100 or 120%. However, because it's rental, my understanding is that they all have to be 80%.
Correct, and that comes from the relevant definition of LMI housing under state law. It's defined differently for sale units and rental units, and for rental units, the maximum threshold, again, under state law, and all these documents will be reviewed by not only legal counsel, but Rhode Island Housing and the monitoring agent. 80% is the max. And the 99-year deed restriction is mentioned in the motion.
Okay.
And then, sorry, following. So if they were for sale, there would be a homeowners association fee. Do I think that rental units, it would all just be included with that monthly fee? And there wouldn't be an additional charge for, detention basin maintenance or any other kind of on-property maintenance?
If these are rental units and we're going to create the landowner will effectively operate the HOA as a one member entity, I don't know that the rental, I don't know that the renters would be obligated to pay any of that. That would just be reflected, I think, in their monthly rent, which would have to be considered affordable.
Yeah, as I understand it, any fees associated with the unit for occupancy are added and considered part of their monthly rent. Let's say they're not separate. So the cost of living there in total of all the fees gets applied to the 80% calculation. So it's not just 80% of the rent and then, oh, by the way, you've got a cable bill or X, Y, and Z. It's X, Y, and Z plus the rent needs to stay under that 80%.
Okay, thank you. So right now, they potentially may be all rental units. If Mr. Hallberg decides to turn these into condominium sales, do we need to now specify what that AMI percentage would be moving forward, or would they stay at 80%? Or like, how does that work moving forward if he changes these into for sale condominiums?
Yeah, Madam Chair, Jamie Rabbit, Planning Director, I would make a recommendation just to clarify that issue. In any approval motion, that you simply state that all 3 rental units must be at 80% of the low moderate income classification. And if the units are ever sold, that 2 of the units are at 80% and 1 of the units is at 120.
I was just going to add that that is also the responsibility of the monitoring agent, I believe, when the situation or occupancy changes at a unit. That's what the monitoring agent is there for,
to make.
I think, Jay, that the monitoring agent's only going to make sure that it meets the state guidelines for lower medium income and would not necessarily be concerned whether it was 80% or 120%, since they both meet the state requirements. So I think Jamie's language is worthwhile and appropriate.
Agreed. Anything else? So just to go over the additional requirements that we've discussed this evening, the monitoring over a 2-year period of time, reevaluation if necessary of the weir and reporting if there's an issue to the town. The HOA being made aware of the existing overflow weir and a statement that they're responsible for maintenance of the drainage infrastructure, keeping it in working order. Prior to construction of the stockade fence, there will be a meeting that will on site that will include planning, DPS staff, arborist, applicant, and landscape architect to evaluate whether or not that stockade installation of the stockade fence will have a negative impact on the existing hedge. The language that Joe suggested relative to retention of an engineer post-construction, I think that language was modified a little bit. Jamie, I don't know if you have that final language.
I have some language.
Okay,
You give me one moment.
certainly.
All right, just, I guess, again, additional language for Holly Street. With regards to the fence, prior to the installation of the stockade fence along the southern and southwesterly property lines, the proposed location shall be staked in the field and reviewed by the planning board's administrative officer. If the proposed fence is deemed to be in conflict with existing vegetation to the point the existing vegetation's survivability will be jeopardized, the developer of the project shall submit an alternative screening/landscape plan to the administrative officer for review and approval. Prior to approval of any revisions to the screening/landscape plan, the administrative officer shall seek input from the planning board regarding said plan. The developer shall create a document that clearly details the maintenance and financial responsibility associated with the site stormwater structure/system. The document may take the form of an HOA and shall incorporate language that includes a maintenance and inspection schedule to be recorded on the land records of the town of South Kingstown. The maintenance and inspection schedule shall be prepared by a Rhode Island registered engineer and shall be signed and sealed. The document shall also include a detailed monitoring and reporting program. A monitoring and reporting program shall occur for a minimum of 2 years post-construction. Prior to recording the document, it shall be reviewed and approved by the planning board's administrative officer in consultation with the town's legal counsel and town engineer. The applicant shall be required to have a design engineer present during construction of the proposed storm water infrastructure on site during construction, and then verify in writing that the storm water infrastructure was installed as designed. If existing trees are identified to be saved, that the applicant provide a detail for tree protection, parentheses, root zone compaction during construction. Let the motion reflect that the 3 affordable units must be set at 80% of medium income per Rhode Island law if they are rental units, and if the units are offered for sale, 2 of the units are offered at 80% of that medium income, and 1 may be offered at 120% of that medium income requirement.
Thanks, Jamie. I would just add to the tree protection measures that there's language that we've used in the past that not only reflects the drip zone, but also prevents compaction. I think they were developed by the Conservation Commission, and we've used that language in the past.
Yeah,
Can I ask,
Yes.
did you mention perhaps an as-built on this, Jamie?
we can do that.
That way we can confirm elevations in that pond. And also, I'll be concerned that the home elevations are set to where they're shown on the plan. And that we're not raising this site so much that it's, it brings more fill in and all of that. We want to just at least, it needs to be installed per plan.
So Rich, is that part of the same condition as the as-built, or would you like that to be, or are you suggesting that be a separate condition?
Well, I'll just look to see if the as-built matches what was constructed. But, what happens though, a lot of times is that we may get a plan in, we'll get a plan in for permitting for our building permit, let's say. It's got certain elevations, but once the contractor gets on site, everything's much different. And then we end up really chasing our tail, trying to get our arms around the impacts of some of that fill that's been brought in. So I just want to make it very clear right from the jump that we're going to be really looking to see that this is installed per plan because we're dealing with such a critical area.
Thanks, Rich. Robin and then Susan?
Am I muted? You can hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, so I recall, and I'm just pulling from memory, Joe had brought up, let's make sure this stormwater calculation is done with impervious driveway surfaces. So my question is, are we still going to go with the pervious surfaces? And then should they not be included in that maintenance contract that they are being maintained?
Madam Chair, the plans still call for pervious pavement.
Yes, that was-
The applicant did modify or submit calculations associated with pervious at the request of the applicant. But again, the plans still call for pervious pavement.
So is there a need to,
That would be
So-
part of the stormwater infrastructure
okay,
that's being proposed and should be in that document.
So would check
Can I-
that it's being maintained?
Yes.
yes.
And I asked, Josh, do you include what the detail is for that pervious pavement? What's the substructure on that? What's below the pavement?
Yeah, we have that in our DEM documents, supplemental documents.
And there's actually a detail, or you actually call off what the materials are at each level? Filter
Correct.
fabric, everything, like sort of in accordance with DEM?
Choking
All right.
stone, gravel, sub
Yeah,
base. Yep. the whole
perfect.
thing. Yep.
All right, perfect.
Yep.
We'll look to see that that's installed exactly as it is per plan, and if it's not, it's gonna have to come out, or you're gonna have to, go back to the planning board for an approval on it. I just want to make it real clear up front, because that's the type of trouble we're running into, is that it's not being installed properly. And I just want to make sure that it's very clear from the start of this that, we're going to be looking to see how that is installed. It's got to be installed exactly per plan, or else it's going to have to come out.
So maybe we should include that with the inspection services performed by the engineer. I would recommend that.
Good idea, Joe. Susan?
So I think the street trees along Holly Street were a pretty valuable portion of this project. And I see that installing the street trees and their location is in the conditions of approval, but not guaranteeing their durability. And whether or not we need to add language that they need to be healthy some period out in the future or replaced, so that we don't end up with either dead street trees or no street trees along Holly Street. Like
Yeah,
how long in the future can we guarantee their survival and thriving and,
It's 2 years in the regulations.
Thank you, Maria.
so we're good without specifying that.
Correct. We don't need to specify anything that's already in the zoning ordinance or the subdivision regulations.
Excellent, thank you.
Anything else? If someone would like to make a motion, we have an additional, let's see, seven items that have been added that we've just discussed. Joe?
Okay, I can make the motion. I might have missed a couple, but I'll do the best I can here. I think I picked up maybe 5 additional. But let me make that motion and then I can be corrected. So starting on page 7 of 10 of draft motion provided by staff. The South Kingstown Planning Board hereby grants preliminary plan approval to the residencies on Holly, a 12-unit major multi-household land development project consisting of 6 duplex structures with 12 total units, and 3 of these units being restricted low and moderate income housing units located on 76 Kelly Way. Scout V. Hallberg, owner applicant. This approval is based upon a plan set entitled Preliminary Plan Submission for the residencies on Holly. Major Land Development Assessors Plat 57-1, Lot 110. Holly Street in South Kingstown, Rhode Island, sheets 1 through 7, dated October 8th, 2021, with revisions through January 21st, 2021. Is that perhaps that's supposed to be 2022? Completed by Persine Company, Inc., P.O. Box 298, Tiverton, Rhode Island, 02878. This approval is based upon the following findings of fact and conditions of approval. Findings of fact A through I. Findings of fact inclusionary zoning J through O. And conditions of approval 1 through I would think it's about 20, let's see, 22, maybe more than that. 18 being the fence, 19 being the HOA maintenance and monitoring, 20 being the during construction and post-construction inspections, as well as an as-built, 21 being the tree protection. And then for the affordable housing, we could make that a separate one, or we can modify existing condition of approval 3 to include that language relative to if the units are the 80% as rental and the 82 at 80% and 1 at 120 if it's sold. I may have missed the additional condition of approval or 2.
Well,
Marie.
I had 7 conditions, which would bring it to 24, although you just referenced adding something to an existing, the
Which would have brought me
monitoring.
to 22, so I missed 1.
So the monitoring, the HOA language, the site visit relative to the stockade fence, the, your suggestion, relative to engineering, tree protection measures, the rental units of AMI, and then Rich's suggestion about the as-built and the site and the construction meeting the requirements.
Okay, I think I had combined the as-built with the inspection services. Maybe that's why I was short 1.
Paul?
Yeah, I'll second the motion, and then I have just a couple of questions. Can I go ahead?
Yes.
Well, it must be getting late. What is located at 76 Kelly Way? It's been a long day.
Is there a cut and paste error somewhere in this?
That may be a carryover that I missed. I apologize. I wasn't aware of that.
Yes, Madam Chairwoman, it's another development that the applicant was working on a couple of years ago. So that's why I raised my hand. So I'm glad Paul caught that.
Well done, Paul.
I thought I was losing it here. All right, so that'll be corrected. And then the only other thing is on item condition of approval 16, I think there's a word missing here. It says prior to construction, the applicant shall have located existing deciduous trees. I'm not sure what that.
Shall
Decision-
locate, just lose the D. Yeah.
I'm good.
Thank you. Good attention to detail. I love it. So we have a motion and a second. Is there additional discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye and raise your hands.
Aye.
Aye. Nays. Motion carries. Thank you, everyone.
Great. Thank you. Have a good night.
You also.
Thank you too.
That brings us to the end of our meeting. Do we need an volunteer for TRC, Jay?
Yes. I believe it, last month, Susan and Peter raised their hands simultaneously. Peter deflected to Susan, but said he would potentially be able to take the next TRC meeting.
Are you still good with that, Peter?
And what's the date, please?
13th, April 13th.
Let me just quickly check, but I'm good.
Good.
9.
And I know Mr. Jordan raised his hand, so he may be in line for the following month.
You know, it's nice to have these things settled in advance, isn't it? Would someone like to, if there's nothing else, would someone like to make
What-
a motion to adjourn?
Just one quick thing, since we're all here, Maria, I just want to make sure everyone knows, double, triple checking for myself as well. Thursday night's meeting is in person. Members will be in attendance at Town Hall.
I think everyone is aware of that, yes? They are now, if they
I know.
weren't before. All right, thank you, Amy. Is there anything else?
That's all I have, Madam Chair.
Thanks, Jamie. And obviously, we're looking forward to a robust work session next time around. Would someone like to make a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
So,
Second.
Third.
motion from Joe, second from Peter. All those in favor say aye and raise your hands.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Good night.
Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Good night, everybody.